Welcome to Real Herbalism Radio, show 234, recorded live at Big Dog Studios in Eugene, Oregon. Today's show is made possible by... Hey, be part of the Herbal Nerd Society. They help support this podcast and Herbs in Action. So you can join them today at herbalnerdsociety.com. To pickle or ferment? That is the question. For the home herbalist, it's a really good one, too. One is quick and easy, while the other turns food into better medicine. But takes longer. Is medicine of fermented foods really helpful? Today, we're talking about pickling and fermenting your summer's harvest. If you'd like to let your food be your medicine, then strap in and join us for this fully fermented ride. Now, here are your hosts.
I'm Candace Hunter.
I'm Patrick Hunter.
And welcome to Real Herbalism Radio.
To pickle or to not pickle?
That is the question. Will there be nobler in the mind to pickle?
Oh, I was going to say it better be nobler in the crock.
In the crock. Oh, that's even better. Oh, you know your Shakespeare.
Well, I have a good teacher, someone that, I don't know. Did
someone that read it in the original Klingon?
Oh, God. Yeah, okay.
Not only am I dated, but now everyone knows I'm totally a science fiction geek. I've been trying to hide that for a while.
For years. All right. Well, so I love me some pickles, and I wanted to know, too, I think most people might be thinking about, what is the difference between pickles and fermentation?
That is a really good question. I spent a lot of my life not really knowing the difference because we called them all the same thing. Pickles, they're dill pickles or they're pickles, but either way, they probably had dill, so I never knew.
Right. So would that be like pickling?
Pickling is actually, so the difference between them.
Between pickle and fermented foods.
Okay, fermented foods, at least fermented vegetables, which is what we're going to talk about now.
Okay, not beer making, people.
Not beer making and not cheese fermentations or kefir fermentations.
Strictly vegetables.
Not bread making.
Okay, strictly vegetables.
We're just going to stick to the vegetables since it's summer and we're harvesting a lot.
Okay, right.
So fermented foods like dill pickles that you make in a crock on the counter, those are technically both pickled and fermented.
Okay.
So the idea behind pickling, or what pickling is submerging your vegetables or your fruits, whatever you're doing, into a vinegar or otherwise acetic brine.
Okay.
It's often called a brine, but it's a solution, an acid solution. And usually that acid solution is like 5 or 6%-ish. Like
a vinegar.
Like a vinegar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, vinegar.
So when you do that, then that preserves the vegetables, and it has a specific set of like chemical reactions and stuff that happen with it. When you ferment, you don't use vinegar. You use salt, sometimes accompanied by water, sometimes not. It kind of depends on how juicy your fruits and vegetables are. When I make sauerkraut through the winter, even in our climate, a lot of times my cabbage doesn't require a brine because it's juicy enough to create its own. So, but salt is key here because salt changes which microbes are going to be able to thrive in that environment. It preserves, but at the same time, the breakdown of the vegetables begins to happen, and then they naturally turn into a acetic brine. So that's why sauerkraut, for instance, is sour, because it's pickled, but it was pickled because it was fermented, not because you put vinegar in it.
Oh, okay.
Make sense?
Yeah. So based on that, you could have, if I'm understanding correctly, right, you could have pickles that were fermented.
Yes.
And pickles that were...
Yes, exactly. So like when you go to the fancy pants, really expensive artisan restaurant where they like talk about how they do everything fresh that day and all the eggs have names and all of that stuff. And it's really fancy, like in Portlandia. They usually garnish it, or they will often garnish it with those lovely, delicious pickled red onions, right?
Right.
And you think, oh, wow, this tastes so good. It's so wonderful. They must have really slaved for this. No, actually, a few hours ago, like 3 or 4 hours maybe before you arrived, they cut up some onions and they put them into the vinegar.
Okay.
Depending on the recipe, they may have added a little bit of cooking to the mix. They may have heated them a little bit to, move the process faster. But it's essentially onions steeped in vinegar for the day with some possible spices.
Okay.
So it's a pickle.
And
Like Indian pickles, when you go to the Indian restaurant and they have all those delicious chutneys, those, they're making that right there, right?
Right.
But then there's the pickles, and they're so good. A lot of those, majority of those, are made within 24 hours of being served. They're being made with a lemon. In that case, oftentimes a lemon juice.
What's the shelf life? I mean, is there a difference? Like the vinegar pickling, I guess, would be...
They last both about the same, pickles, something that's just been pickled versus something that's been fermented. Okay. As long as we're talking about a fermentation that happened correctly, no weird stuff happened, it'll get to about the same amount of vinegarization. If you've ever done like dill pickles on the counter, you notice that the first day when you first get them, you can hardly wait to eat them. You eat them, and there's a little bit of pickle flavor to them, but they're not quite as, there's a little bit more saltiness flavor to them. And you probably realize, I probably could have waited another day or even two. But then a week and a half later, if there's any left, you'll notice they're considerably more sour than they were when you had that first one.
Right.
And that's because with fermented on-the-counter crock-style fermenting, it continues to get more sour and it continues to ferment and change. With a pickle-style pickle, just like canned dill pickles, for instance, they stay exactly as they are.
Right.
So you canned them up, and that's what they're going to be. And they'll be that same flavor, that same level of acidity when you open them up in a few months, or if you open them up and have them in your refrigerator for a while.
Right, okay. That's why you seem to get to store pickles in the fridge forever and they don't really go bad.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So aside from, the benefits of, the benefits of pickling that you said was fast and easy, what are some other benefits of pickling? Yeah,
it's not just, we pickle not just because it's fast and easy. I mean, it is, and that's awesome.
Right.
It makes it easier. But we also pickle things because the process of pickling causes the vegetables that are immersed in the acetic, thing to start to break down and change. As a part of that process, digestive enzymes are released. And those digestive enzymes, kind of like the supplements that like people have been totally touting about how, if you have any gassiness after you eat, you should have these supplements or, that's...
Yeah, those enzymes.
Yeah, those enzymes.
Some of those companies, yeah.
Yeah. So those enzymes are along the same lines as what gets released automatically or naturally when you pickle something.
So have a pickle, not an enzyme.
Yeah. Potentially. There are a small number of people who truly do actually need those supplements.
Sure.
But for the most part, a vast majority of the people who are buying them and taking them probably would be healthier if they were using pickles and fermented foods, as well as a variety of other dietary choices that are probably important for them.
Right.
So you've got your digestive enzymes that happen as a part of the pickling process. You also have that sour flavor. And that's really an important flavor in terms of health and well-being. If you don't have sour in your diet, you are more likely to be encountering digestive problems. The sour flavor triggers a whole chain of chemical reactions throughout your digestive system. And it does begin in your mouth. Sour will make you salivate. Most people will notice that. And then that continues down through your whole entire digestive tract. The part where sour, according to like Ayurveda and TCM and other traditional herbal systems, the part where sour really does the most work is on the early part of digestion. It helps trigger bile release and that sort of thing.
So eat your pickle, people, before you have your burger and fries.
Yes.
Because they always give you that pickle wedge.
Yes, that's exactly.
Or if you go to a sandwich place,
that's
exactly. Pickle, why did I have a pickle wedge? Well, now we know.
Yes, that's exactly why it's there, because those foods are often a little bit high in fats, and the pickle will just get your body started with the digestion so your stomach's ready for it. And so the rest of the digestive tract can break it down much more easily.
See, there you go. Explains it. Cool.
Yeah. So fermented foods.
Oh, wait, no.
Oh,
there's a couple other things I want to, because pickling has so many things, vinegar matters, right? Because, if you use crappy white vinegar, maybe have a different flavor if you use really,
flavor, there's a difference in the flavor. If you're pickling something that's a really lightly flavored food, then I can see where someone may want to go with a white vinegar. That isn't necessarily a horrible thing. White vinegars are usually a grain-based vinegar. If you can. It's rare. I haven't personally seen a lot of natural, not pasteurized white vinegars.
Right.
Typically, the unpasteurized vinegars that I see on the market, like at the grocery store, are apple cider vinegar. And apple cider vinegar with the mother in it, which really just means it's still a live culture, is going to have more probiotics in it. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to pickle your cucumbers or your lemon or your whatever, your onions, and you choose the apple cider vinegar with the mother in it, you're adding a little bit of the probiotics that you might otherwise not get unless you were doing a full fermented style pickle. Mm-hmm. So that's really much better for you. On the other hand, if your only choice is white vinegar, that's not necessarily a terrible thing.
No, I mean, you have to be practical, right? You have to go with what you have. Don't just say, oh, I can't pickle today. I have to go get, my mother contained apple cider vinegar.
Yeah.
One of the things that, as we talk about on, Real Herbalism Radio, the Pickle Herbalist, how to get herbs involved, could you use herbal vinegars that we've had people make?
Yes, you could use an herbal vinegar for pickling if you wanted. Yeah. Essentially, a pickle is about the same thing as an herbal vinegar. So what's happening when you've got your cucumber in your brine or you're in your vinegar, is that the cucumber's getting to break down. The acid of the brine solution is preventing it from rotting, so it's killing off the bad bacteria that would create rotting. And it's encouraging the enzymes that naturally occur when the cucumber begins to break down. Mm-hmm. It's encouraging those to develop, and it's encouraging the beginnings of. Doesn't do probiotics specifically, but it encourages that transfer of nutrition or nutrients from the pickle into the juice, which is the same thing that's happening when you put your cleavers into a thing of apple cider vinegar and infuse it.
Okay.
And the cleavers you leave in there for quite a while, and pretty much as possible of the nutrients get transferred out. All that's left, hopefully, if you've been fortunate and it's all worked out the way you want it to, when you strain the cleavers out, all that you're taking out is essentially the fiber. So if you have a pickle, like a dill pickle that's just, vinegar-style dill pickle, and you drink the juice from that, you're actually doing your body good.
So, okay, so I was, everyone, when you think pickling, you always think the pickle, but what you're really saying is when you infuse herbs in vinegar, you're pickling them.
Yes, that's exactly what you're doing.
Okay.
Yep.
So aside from the benefits, which is a little fast and easy, it stimulates digestion. The vinegar you choose matters, of course, and this is the same process for doing herbal vinegars. So what are the benefits of the fermented variety? So because we covered pickling, and that just seems like relatively easy.
Yeah, and a lot of the health benefits of pickling are also there in your fermented
ones. Okay, so what other benefits do fermentation of vegetables have?
When you ferment vegetables, you do two things. For one thing, a lot of times the nutrients become more bioavailable.
Okay.
And then the other thing that happens is you have a live culture of friendly microbes that you're creating, essentially.
Okay.
And so as the friendly microbes create their culture and do their fermentation work, the first thing they actually do technically with fermented foods is turn it into alcohol, which they then immediately turn into vinegar. And it's a combination of two different types of microbes whose names I always forget, but it's two little microbes that work together. Yeast is one of them, and then I forget the name of the acidifiers.
Okay.
So they work together to do that, and when you eat this stuff, are taking in those microbes. So you're improving your microbiome. Your microbiome is the microbes living in your gut.
Right.
Microbes living in your gut do the vast majority of the work of digesting your food. Mm-hmm. Your teeth and all of that do some, but by the time it gets down into your gut, that's where all the chemical reactions, majority of the chemical reactions are happening. So you want to make your microbiome really happy and healthy. Fermented foods delivers to them the stuff that makes them really happy and healthy. So you're feeding your gut properly with fermented foods. Mm-hmm. Make sense?
Yeah.
And then the other thing that happens in the process of them doing what they do, the chemical reactions they do will often break down and change the nutrients that are in the food such that it becomes easy for your body to absorb it. So particularly for people who have had problems with absorption or who have been through a course of antibiotics, for instance, where their microbiome has been harmed or damaged or whatever. They're going to do better with a little bit of fermented foods to kind of give their gut a boost.
So vinegars are really important in pickling, but it seems like when you were saying earlier that the biggest difference, of course, is using the usage of salt.
Yes.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, can you just go grab some table salt and throw it in?
You can. It's preferable not to use an iodized table salt because iodine prevents fermentation, or it's a preservative that, again, prevents fermentation. You can get away with things like sea salt and kosher salt. It's best if you can do, in my opinion anyway, it's best if you can do one of the salts that are as unprocessed or minimally processed as possible, because those tend to have more minerals in them.
Is there, I'm familiar with like the kosher salt and sea salt, but is there a different salt that you would recommend? Usually,
I've found those salts. There's one particular brand in Utah.
Oh yeah.
There's one particular brand in Utah that I have liked. It's called Real Salt.
Okay.
And that one has a lot of minerals. It's mined from Utah's, if I remember correctly.
I've seen that, and we've used that before. Yeah. And we got that at Natural Grocers before.
Yeah. And, I mean, honestly, it's the salts that are like the Himalayan ones and I can't remember. There's a whole bunch of fancy
salts, fancy pants salts.
Yeah, fancy pants salts. I don't know if your average, Piggly Wiggly has those ones or not. Mm-hmm. But I believe they do. No. At the very least, I would aim for sea salt over table salt.
Right.
Fancier salt I can get, the better.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So that's interesting. And there are some other really cool digestive things that, because of the enzymes that they create.
Yeah.
Right. Can you go through so there's three
major enzymes that are created
during this process?
During this process, yeah. And it happens both with pickled and with fermented foods. Although my understanding, and I don't have hard, fast science on it, but my understanding is that the enzymes can tend to be a little bit higher in number in fermented foods than in pickled foods.
Okay.
So there's three types, essentially. They're the amylase, protease, and lactase. Okay. And I probably totally mispronounced those words.
No, I think you did it.
But they're the ones that a lot of us have seen when we're reading anything relating to nutrition. Mm-hmm. Those three enzymes are really, really important for us as we digest, to help us break down the foods and turn them into microbes that our gut can safely absorb. So that's what you're looking for, and that's why you'd want to use those. The supplement companies right now are busy putting those into powdered form, into capsules, or powder that you sprinkle, I guess, on your yogurt. I'm not sure what people are using them, how they're using them exactly, but they're touting them for things like bloating and gas and intestinal tract cramping.
Well, one of the things I like is like kimchi, and that really helps me with that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, kimchi and fermented foods will do a lot of that.
One of the things that, we talk about salt, mm-hmm. and that's a trigger word for a lot of people.
Yes.
That's too much salt. I have high blood pressure.
Yeah.
What do you say to that idea that salt is too much?
There's a lot of conflict on that question. There are plenty of professionals, researchers, doctors, whomever, that are saying things like no pickles for you because you have hypertension. Don't have mm-hmm. salty foods. We got to reduce your sodium levels. And that is, I'm not contradicting them, but there's a whole nother set of them that are saying, well, the science shows that when people do things like have kimchi, mm-hmm. from naturally properly fermented kimchi, even though there's high levels of sodium, they're not seeing an increase. They're actually seeing a decrease in high blood pressure. When I look at kimchi, I think, well, there's an awful lot of potential things going on there. Researchers currently think perhaps there's more potassium that's made bioavailable and therefore absorbed by the individual in question. Mm-hmm. And potassium and sodium work together to govern certain gateways in the cellular structures. And so if potassium's in the cell, then sodium's out and vice versa. So if you have enough potassium to balance your sodium, your blood pressure goes down.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially the uber simple version of what that means.
So
the other thing, though, that I would suggest is kimchi itself is filled with things that are anti-inflammatory. And high blood pressure is often linked to inflammation, systemic inflammation. So is kimchi helping these people reduce their blood pressure because of the ginger and garlic? Or is it doing it because of the potassium? I don't know. And there isn't enough research.
So if you're really salt sensitive,
Yes.
like you just want to avoid it, can you ferment foods without using salt?
You can definitely ferment foods without including salt, or with including very minimal amounts of salt. I'm going to say it's a little bit more challenging. I haven't personally done it a lot myself.
Oh, right, because we don't really think of it being an issue in our household.
Right. For us, it's not a huge issue. But
so I was thinking about my friend I was having drinks with the other day, and him and I were talking about he has high blood pressure, and I noticed when he ordered, we had tater tots at this pub, and I noticed that he got like the lowest flavored tater tots, and I said, "What's up?" He said, "Oh, I have high blood pressure." Yeah. And I said, "That's interesting." I said, "Look at you. You work out. You do all this stuff. You're really fit." And I said, "Look at me. I don't have that at all."
Right.
And I'm not saying, I mean, obviously genetics has a lot to do with a lot of things.
Yes.
And it runs in his family. But I'm wondering if I talked to him, I was, "Hey, have you thought about increasing your fermented foods in your diet and see if it naturally reduces your blood pressure?"
It would be a really interesting experiment. And if I was in his position, I'd give it a try, because how hard is that?
Right? How hard is that? Besides, like me, I come home and snack on kimchi if I can.
Right.
I love that stuff.
Yes. So one of the challenges with trying to ferment without salt is that you need to pull the juices out of the vegetables, and salt does a really, rocking job of that.
Right.
So you're going to have to figure out how to juice or get as much juice out as possible.
Oh, wow.
Squeeze the heck out of them, I'm thinking.
Wow, and that still wouldn't be a lot.
It might be really challenging. A lot of people do things like add things like celery juice, which is, good for fermenting. And honestly, celery juice would be a good thing if you were dealing with high blood pressure in particular. I've seen other things like people using powdered freeze-dried yogurt, which should still have live probiotics in it, or, a small amount of yogurt to help start it. If you were, for instance, to do a regular salt fermentation that, came out nice and let it get good and sour, so it's got a good, strong set colony in it, and then you used a little bit of that to help get your ferment started, I think that would probably be really helpful. I've also heard of people getting probiotic capsules and then opening them up and putting them in. If there's anyone out there who has done or is interested in doing this, definitely shoot me an email. Let me know how it went, because I haven't done low salt ferments myself. Okay. But I've read a little bit here and there about them.
But there is a way.
So
there's so many different things between the two types of pickling and fermenting. Why are they really just so beneficial?
Part of it is that getting your digestive started, the sour portion of it. One of the things that's nice about fermented foods, as opposed to pickles, is that fermented foods seem to be able to cover up the bitter flavor a lot easier or a lot better.
Okay.
So bitter is an important flavor in our digestive process because it helps to trigger the detoxification. It supports the detoxification aspect of what our liver does. Mm-hmm. So it'll, in Chinese medicine, and Ayurveda too, I suppose, but Chinese medicine really, they talk about it draining toxins out. So your liver's job is to send in the bile and then take the stress hormones and various other hormones and things and convert them. It goes through like a 2-stage conversion process to get them into a form that you can then expel safely. So your body can process them the rest of the way out. The sour part helps with the bile portion, and the bitter part supports that detoxing and breaking down of chemicals part. With pickling, you tend to taste the bitter more. It's more in your face. But with fermenting, at least my experience of it is, but with fermenting, you get a nice balance between the two. So you get both bitter and sour without having to taste as much of the bitter. So either way, you're supporting your digestive system and you're supporting your liver, which does a lot of work to eliminate toxins. So that's one important benefit.
Right, right. What I was thinking of too is, what we've been hearing, especially this year, a ton, and especially the latter part of the first phase of COVID, was, people with healthy immune systems were able to fend off most of the major symptoms that COVID was been responsible for.
And that is part of why good fermented foods and good digestion is so important, because if you've got a strong, healthy gut with a strong, healthy microbiome, you also tend to have an immune system that's well supported and less reactive. So pretty much good health begins in your gut. You feed your gut well, you take good care of your microbiome will tend to take good care of you. There's also a link between your microbiome's health and mood disorders like, anxiety, depression, bipolar, and irritability, anger, mood swings. Mm-hmm. And part of that link is they're still in the process of studying that. But one of the things that researchers have noted is that if someone has like Crohn's disease or IBS, irritable bowel syndrome or disorder, and they aren't responding well to traditional treatments, sometimes by giving them an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety drug, they'll find that person responds well. And they used to think that the anxiety or depression was causing the digestive disorder. But now they're starting to reverse their thinking, and they're starting to recognize what I think most herbalists have been knowing, or have been like recognizing for centuries at this point, which is health begins in the gut. If your gut is in good shape, you tend to be less likely to have mood swings, less likely to be succumbing to emotional swings or emotional changes like that, as well as less likely to get flus and colds and other illnesses. You're also less likely to have systemic inflammation if you take really good care of your gut. Systemic inflammation is, we don't know if it's the reason why we get diseases or if it's a result or a side effect of diseases, but it's strongly linked to a vast majority of the diseases that we face right now. So things like Alzheimer's and dementia and various other multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's. So nervous system related stuff. It's also linked with PMS, menopause, and the very extreme versions of those, infertility, endometriosis. There's like fibromyalgia. There's inflammation or systemic inflammations linked with that. Circulatory diseases like heart disease and high blood pressure and low blood pressure are both linked to inflammation. Pretty much any diseases, you're probably going to find there's a pretty strong link to systemic inflammation. So take care of your gut, you're going to do a better job of reducing inflammation throughout your whole body.
So now that we know that we should be eating pickled and fermented foods, and it seems to me that from what you're saying, I would probably go with the fermented side of things.
If you can, if you can, I think it's wise. But pickles aren't bad.
No, I'm not. I like my pickles. I get that.
Aunt Patty's icebox pickles.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, and you can whip them up.
Right.
Hours before the party.
Now that I know this, how do I get my hands on some fermented foods?
Most people have two options. The first option, if you are fortunate, is that you can go to the grocery store and you can get live fermented foods. Usually you're going to find them in the refrigerator section.
Oh, yeah. They're not cheap, though.
They're not cheap. That's why I'm saying you have two options. And the first one is if you're lucky.
Yeah, right.
If you're lucky and you can find it, if you're lucky and that's affordable for you. It is potentially a good place to start while you're waiting for the second option to really kick in. And the second option is to make your own. You can ferment your own foods at home. It's not that hard. There's loads of different recipes out there, but it's really, honestly, you can do it pretty basically. I mean,
so do you have a I know in your research on this, I think you were looking at a book I saw you the other day.
Yeah, the one that I've liked for fermented foods has been the Wild Fermentation by Sander Katz.
Okay.
And part of why I like that is that he covers a really wide range of fermented foods. So, I personally like the kimchis and the sauerkrauts and the cabbage-based ferments, and I'm good.
Right.
But sometimes you get sick of that. Knowing how to make your own yogurt is awfully nice. Being able to say, I think I'm going to make some kvass. That would be great.
Some what?
Kvass. It's a drink, fermented drink.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Is this the next kombucha? It's kvass?
Could be.
Okay, you have to tell me what that one is.
But also, he talks about those. He talks about kombucha. He covers a lot of different fermentations. And the reality is that if you are choosing to put fermented foods into your diet for health reasons, it's good to have a variety of them. So eating kimchi every day for the rest of your life isn't going to be bad for you, but it wouldn't be inadvisable to maybe have kimchi this week, but next week have some kombucha instead.
Okay.
Week after that, maybe do some yogurts.
Just like anything else, when you do the same thing over and over again, your body responds, but then it kind of
gets bored.
It likes to be, I think, your body is definitely a dynamic system and likes to change. It's like when we work out, we always are changing things up.
Yeah, it's just like the plants. They respond better if there's a lot of different stimuli.
Right.
So
what are your 5 tips for fermented foods here?
Let's see here. My first tip would be to use nutrient-dense salt.
Like that Utah salt.
Utah salt or one of those. That's going to give you more minerals, which, that's always good.
All right. And tip number 2?
When you're making your brine, if you're like, I'm doing a sauerkraut, like I said before, my cabbage tends to be juicy enough to make its own. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I've got to top it off. So if I'm making a brine, I usually use a tablespoon of salt to a cup of water, which for the folks who are not on U.S. measurements is about 15 milliliters of salt and about 236 milliliters of water.
And I wouldn't be surprised that the cabbage that you get at the store is drier than the cabbage you're going to pull out of your garden.
Yes. So. Yeah, and the time of year makes a difference too, because how fresh your cabbage is will matter.
Okay, tip number 3.
I like adding spices to my things, like my sauerkrauts.
Yeah, every time I look at the sauerkraut and there's like, what's in there now? There's more than just caraway in there.
Yes, I've tried all kinds of interesting stuff. Caraway was good, but it actually fermented out much more bitter than I expected, and fennel did as well.
Right.
They were good, but star anise, oh my God, that ferments out.
Cinnamon was actually really good in there too.
Yeah, those two have a lot of surprising amount of sweetness when they ferment it out. I've also done ginger and turmeric, and I've done them together, and I've also done them as individuals.
Yeah, I wouldn't probably recommend powdered spices, would you?
No, usually if you can do dried, it's better.
Like whole?
Yeah, dried and whole, because you can then, like the star anise, for instance, a lot of times I don't end up eating the star anise itself. I give that to my dog.
So what's the 4th tip?
Save the brine, because at the end of the batch that you're on, you can take a little bit of that brine, the fermented stuff, and you can pour that into the next one to give it a boost so it'll start.
Like a starter.
Yeah, it'll ferment faster. The other thing, too, is that it's really good for you. So I have done things like I made salad dressing. I had one ferment of kimchi that was much juicier than I expected. So when I got to the end, I had all this liquid. It was actually liquidy liquid. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up putting that into salad dressing and using it as the vinegar part of my salad dressing.
Look at you.
It was really tasty.
Practical. Tip 5.
Leave a ton of headspace. You can cover whatever you're doing loosely, but leave a lot of space at the top, because fermentations can really bubble up.
And headspace is the distance between the top of the liquid or vegetable
space,
and the cap?
Yeah, space for the fermentation to rise up, and as the gases build, they'll push things up, the food, but also the liquid level will go up. And if you leave quite a bit at the top, then you don't have spillovers. So. All
right. Well, now, after going through all of this stuff, I'm telling you, it makes me appreciate the stuff that we've been doing all along, and makes me want even more some kimchi when I get home.
Oh, I've got a kimchi challenge for you, actually.
What?
Yeah.
A challenge?
I challenge you to make some kimchi on your own.
Me?
Actually make it.
No way.
Because I've been the one doing all the fermenting.
Well, I know, because I got stuff to do.
Yeah.
And I like eating it.
I know. That's part of my challenge too. Because
Okay.
I make it and then it's like gone.
So, challenge accepted. In our herb chat next time, for this show will be me talking about making of the kimchi.
We'll see how you do.
All
We'll
right.
see if the kimchi is tasty.
Right? As always, put an herb on it. The statements made about herbs and products on this podcast have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided on this podcast or any affiliated websites is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional. You should not use the information on this podcast and its affiliated websites for a diagnosis or treatment of any health problem. Always consult with a healthcare professional before starting any new vitamins, supplements, diet, or exercise program before taking any medication, or if you have or suspect you might have a health problem. Any testimonials, questions, or case studies are based on individual results and do not constitute a guarantee that you will achieve the same results.